Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy DeYoung. Welcome to another edition of Prophecy Today Intelligence Briefing. The headline today, Jews all around the world spend one day praying for the temple to be rebuilt on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And at the same time, in Jerusalem, in the Israeli Knesset, the legislative body of the State of Israel, they are discussing a permanent entrance to the Temple Mount and thus to the temple. That's a pretty long headline, but that's what we'll be discussing with our broadcast partners today, right here on PTIB. Winkie Medad will come to talk about Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av, that one day that Jews around the world stopped to pray for the rebuilding of the next temple within the next year. And then David Dolan will come with that report from the Knesset on how they are discussing a permanent entrance to the Zion Gate entrance to the Temple Mount, and thus up to the temple that every Jew is expecting to be built in the next year. But before we go to my broadcast partners, let me show you this DVD documentary. For over 30 years, I have been documenting how the Jewish people are making preparations to put the next temple up on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. In this DVD documentary, Ready to Rebuild Revisited, I look at every preparation, every project, every personality that wants to put that temple up on the Temple Mount. This has exclusive footage in it. Nobody else in the world has this footage. We go inside the Dome of the Rock. We tell you all the projects that are going on. We go into the harp factory where they're making the 4,000 harps that the people at the Temple Institute have designated for the 4,000 Levites to play when that temple does stand in Jerusalem. We do go into that harp factory. We go into the areas where they're studying the priestly duties, and we'll have an interview with the rabbi who received the first of the priestly garments that the men will wear when the temple does stand in the city of Jerusalem. You need to get a copy of this DVD documentary. Go to my website, prophecytoday.com. Go to the Prophecy Bookstore, and there you can make your purchase of Ready to Rebuild Revisited. Now we go to Winkie Medad for that report about Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av, when Jews pray for that temple to be rebuilt within the next year. And all of these activities, praying at the different gates around the Temple Mount, reading the book of Lamentations, and of course fasting, creating a desire in the Jewish people for the rebuilding of the next temple, correct?
Absolutely, although there is a story that we do not know if it was true or not, but I will tell the tale to you and our listeners, Jimmy. Napoleon was of which it was told that he was walking around one night in Paris, and he heard this bewailing and crying coming from a corner building. He walked in and found Jews sitting on the floor, and he asked someone of authority, he said, "What are you doing on the floor, reading from the Bible, the book of Lamentations, and crying?" And he said, "Well, our temple was destroyed." And he said, "Well, when did this happen? I didn't hear about it." And they said, "Well, it happened," okay, we're talking about Napoleon, that was 1800. "It happened 1,000 years ago or so." Napoleon says, 1,000 years ago? 1,200 years ago? A people that mourns in such a way the loss of the temple, which of course for us also means the loss of political sovereignty and independence, will yet regain both the temple and its political sovereignty. So whether or not the story is true, of course, Jimmy, as we know, it does have a kernel of truth, and Tisha B'Av was also a contributory factor in bringing Jews back to Zion.
Tisha B'Av, that 9th day of the Jewish month of Av, which Napoleon noticed a number of years ago, that the Jews do indeed have a desire to have that temple on the Temple Mount by next Tisha B'Av, just less than a year from now. And now David Dolan with that report about the Knesset. They're in a discussion as to how to put up a permanent entrance to the Temple Mount so they can go up onto the Temple Mount and thus to the temple, if that temple should indeed be rebuilt within the next year. Here's David Dolan. David, a very interesting discussion going on in the Israeli Knesset, which is the parliamentary legislative body of Israel. They're discussing access to the third temple, which will be on the Temple Mount in the future. Now, it's not there at the present time. However, the entrance, the only non-Muslim entrance to the Temple Mount, has some real problems. It's about to fall apart. What can you tell us? What's the latest?
Well, Jimmy, that's the Mughrabi Gate in the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. It's elevated. It's above the women's section of the Western Wall prayer area. It's a temporary footbridge, suspended in air, basically, that was put up over 10 years ago and intended to just be up there for a couple of years until a more permanent structure could be built, a solider structure, as it were. And when it was announced that Israel would maybe begin work on a permanent structure, and the Jerusalem municipality ordered the old bridge down, that was a few years ago, havoc ensued in the Arab world, and especially amongst Hamas and Hezbollah and others, screaming that Israel's Judaizing Jerusalem. And by the way, Jimmy, they discovered near there recently and just announced this week that they found part of the wall that the Babylonians broke into in 586 BC. The ancient wall of Jerusalem is described in Isaiah and other prophets and the books of the Bible. And Hamas went ballistic over that and said, you're, again, trying to steal the Arabic history of the city. There were no Jews here. There were no old walls and no temple and that sort of thing. So just replacing a footbridge that is a dangerous structure, it really is, engineers say, not built to be a permanent bridge, not built to carry that sort of weight. To just say they're going to do that, it creates chaos, and so far no government has done it. But the new Bennett government says we have to do this. We could have hundreds of people on the bridge fall down onto hundreds of female worshipers below at the Western Wall and kill hundreds of people. So it has to be replaced, they're saying, and we'll see what happens. But it just shows, again, anything touching Jerusalem is like a firecracker going off. It's a spark that can set a big fire ablaze very, very quickly.
Two very important reports. Winkie Medad speaking about the fact that Jews on a yearly basis, they go to the opportunity they have to get to Jerusalem, if that is possible. They go to all the gates of the Temple Mount area, or some of them even this year, about 2,000 Jewish people were allowed to go up onto the Temple Mount on Tisha B'Av. Now that is the Hebrew phrase for the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av. And it's on that day they do pray. First of all, they'll have a fast on that day, a 25-hour fast, very similar to the one at Yom Kippur, the very solemn day of Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, a very solemn day as well. Then after they fast all day, they will go to the Temple Mount or to the gates of the Temple Mount area. They will be in mourning. They will read the book of Lamentations. The reason they read the book of Lamentations, in chapter 3, we can read the eyewitness account of the temple being destroyed by Jeremiah the prophet. He writes these 5 chapters. They read through them as they mourn the destruction of the temple, and then they pray. They pray for the temple by next Tisha B'Av to be up on the Temple Mount and in operations. We do know the Bible does call for a temple on the Temple Mount. That phrase in the book of Daniel, chapter 9 and verse 27, says that the Antichrist is going to show up and he's going to commit the abomination of desolation there on the Temple Mount and in the temple. That 2 Thessalonians passage, chapter 2 and verse 4, says the Antichrist will go into the Holy of Holies and claim to be God. So there's two passages of Scripture, Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 4. And Jesus confirmed there will be a temple on the Temple Mount during that 7-year period of time. We do know that the rapture of the church, the next event, a period of time called the tribulation, and then the return of Jesus Christ. We do know that that period of time, that 7 years, will have a temple on the Temple Mount, and that's Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15 confirms that temple on the Temple Mount. Jews around the world on Tisha B'Av, one day of fasting, mourning, reading the book of Lamentation, and praying for a temple to be on the Temple Mount, and at the same time the Israeli Knesset discussing how to have a permanent entrance up to the Temple Mount and into the temple itself. By the way, that temple will not be on the Temple Mount, that next temple, which is referred to as the Tribulation Temple. That temple will not be up on the Temple Mount until after the rapture of the church. The rapture could happen at any moment, and with every bit of information I've given you today, since the rapture has to happen before that temple is up on the Temple Mount, looks like that rapture could be very close at hand. In fact, it indeed could happen today. And having said that, not a whole lot more for me to say, except let's keep looking up until it does happen, the rapture of the church. That is my prophetic perspective on the news today. I'm Jimmy DeYoung. Thank you so very much for joining me on this edition of Prophecy Today Intelligence Briefing. Be sure to come back again next time when I will continue to look at current events in light of biblical prophecy.